Welcome everybody to my talk on ABCD of antenatal thalassemia diagnosis. ABCD stands for anybody can diagnose it. All you require to do this is a thermocycler and more importantly, a will to do something good. I give my credits to Dr. Somesh. He is a PhD resident in the Maulana Azad Medical College. He's been with this job of antenatal thalassemia diagnosis for over 6 years and has been very helpful to me when I was standardizing these protocols. And he's also been kind to allow me to share his telephone numbers that if anybody is interested in carrying out this work in their lab, you can contact him or me for establishing it. We will be ready to do your hand holding. Before we understand the antenatal diagnosis of thalassemia, a basic introduction to what is beta thalassemia. It is a genetic defect in the beta globin. Normally there are only 2 genes of this in the human system. There's no other copy of this genes. So if there is a mutation in these genes, then it results in the production of a defective hemoglobin with a wide range of spectrums. If one of the gene is mutated, you still have a normal gene. Some amount of beta globin is being produced, so there will be normal hemoglobin as well as the quantitatively the hemoglobin will be less. These children could range from asymptomatic stage to mild anemias. But when both the genes are damaged and both the genes are defective, and when there's a total quantitative defect in the production of hemoglobin, these children will be severely anemic and totally transfusion dependent. Now, what is the problem with lifelong transfusion? Apart from the psychosocial somatic disorders that can occur because of lifelong transfusion, both to the child as well as the parent, the biggest problem that clinically and medically we face is iron overload. The child requires lifelong chelation therapy, and chelation therapy is very expensive. Deposition of iron in the pancreas results in diabetes, and deposition of iron in the liver results in hemochromatosis and liver failure. Also, when multiple transfusions are being given to a child, there is a possibility of developing alloantibodies against the minor RBC antigens. And when these develop, providing a suitable matched blood for the patient becomes a nightmare in the blood bank. So, what is the genetics of this disease? There is a mutation in the beta globin gene. If the mutations in both the genes are the same, this condition is a homozygous state. But if the child inherits one mutation from the father and other mutation from the mother, the beta globin gene has 2 different mutations. There are no normal beta globin genes, so the child is going to be a thalassemia major and transfusion dependent. But since the mutations are different, this condition is called a compound heterozygous state. The common mutations that we find in India are usually 5, and they cover up to 95% of all the known mutations that you get in the Indian population. And they're called the IVS15 intervening sequence 15, a 619 base pair deletion in exome 1, IVS11, a frame shift mutation 89, and a frame shift mutation 4142. Together, this cover about 90 to 95% of the mutations of beta thalassemia in India. So, before going on, let's understand the genetic probability when 2 couples marry and the probability that they can get a thalassemic child. Now, if the father and the mother both are thalassemia majors and they marry, well, it is rare that such a thing should happen, but as you realize over here, there is no normal beta globin gene. So, but naturally, the child will also be thalassemic major. If one parent is normal and the other parent is a thalassemic major, then this abnormal gene and a normal gene will be the genotype of the child, and this child will present as a thalassemic trait. So if you have one thalassemia major marrying a normal patient, the offsprings of the children of the couple would be thalassemic traits. Now, if one of the parent is normal and the other parent is a thalassemic trait, then the probability is that you could get 2 normal children, or this abnormal gene could be transmitted to 2 of the children, but they have a normal copy from the other spouse. So they will be traits. The problem occurs when a thalassemic trait marries another thalassemic trait. In this probability, you can find that one of the child could be a thalassemic major. Now, the important point we need to understand over here is that both these traits may not clinically manifest with severe anemia. They may not know that they are having thalassemia, but they end up with a child who is thalassemia major, and their bundle of joy turns to a burden of care. These are the people who don't know that there is a problem with them, and the realization occurs when they have a child who requires continuous blood transfusions. What we need to do with the advancement in the medical technology and the universality of PCRs, we should consider a thalassemic major child being born as a failure in the medical system. We need to be proactive and aggressive in actively finding out who are the couples who are at risk of getting a thalassemic major child. We need to do a complete genetic workup of the parents and the chorionic villi sample, and then come to a genetic conclusion as to what is the problem and offer genetic counseling to the parents. We have to give them all the information about the would-be child, and they need to take an informed decision as to what they want to do with the pregnancy. So once again, identifying the risk groups. If both the parents are normal, the offspring is going to be normal, there is no risk. If both the parents are abnormal, the outcome is going to be a thalassemic major, so this is obvious. If one parent is a thalassemic major and the other parent is normal, the outcome is going to be a thalassemic trait. No problems here also. If one parent is normal and the other parent is the trait, the outcome at best is going to be normal, or at worst going to be a trait. No issues here also. So the couple at risk is when both the parents are trait, because here's where you get a thalassemic major child. So this is the group, both the parents being thal traits. This is the group that we need to actively and aggressively hunt and investigate. So where is our starting point? Usually the starting point is the first antenatal visit. Now this is not biased or gender biased. A male who is a thalassemic trait would usually not seek medical advice very often. Okay, but when a lady conceives and comes to the seeking antenatal counseling, that is the time we have a contact point, and that is the time we need to start our process. So the starting point ideally becomes the first antenatal visit of a lady. Hemoglobin is universally done. We need to add a hemoglobin HPLC or electrophoresis for identifying whether this lady is a thal trait or not. If she is a thal major, it is obvious. And how do we know whether she is a thal trait or not? We generally work on the HbA2 levels, and values greater than 3.5 and less than 10% is suggestive that this lady would be a thal trait. Obviously, you should have an appropriate hemogram pattern also showing microcytic hypochromic anemia with increase in the RBC numbers and probably a slightly increased reticulocyte count. But the point over here we need to be important about is that the HbA2 level should be between 3.5% to 10%. Beyond the 10%, keep in mind HbE, HbC also co-migrate and give you values. So values of HbA2 greater than 10% would more likely to be hemoglobinopathies of HbC or HbE. Between 3.5 to 10%, it is more likely to be a raised HbA2 level, and a raised HbA2 level occurs in a background of thalassemia. Now, if the mother is a trait because of this is the time where we start working. If she's not a trait, story closed. If she is a trait, we need to call the father and do the HbLC or electrophoresis of the father to evaluate whether the father is a trait or not. I had said that the in-risk population that we need to actively screen out are when the father and the mother both are thal traits. Up till now, we've established that the mother is a thyroid trait. We need to work up the father. So, we've done the workup of the father. We find that the mother is a thyroid trait, and we find that the father does not have thalassemia. He's not a thyroid trait. How do we proceed? The mother is a trait, the father is normal. At best, the child will be normal. At worst, the child is going to be a trait. So actually nothing more needs to be done with this. But if the father is also detected to be a trait, here's where we have the probability that the affected child could also be a thalassemic major, and this is where we need to actually aggressively work out and establish the diagnosis. Usually the sample of choice for detecting this is a chorionic villi sampling. There is literature about checking cell-free DNA of fetal origin from the maternal blood, but this is still in the early stages. What is usually done is sampling of the chorionic villi sample, and for technicality and technical reasons, 12th week is around about the time when they do a chorionic villus sampling. We also have to keep in mind the concept of turnaround time, that is how much time we have to do all these analyses and give a report. So what do? We have to extract the DNA, we have to do the tests. In case you get a result which is actionable, then we need to reconfirm it, because the implications of our results is going to be quite significant. And once we are sure that what we've done is correct, we need to offer genetic counseling to the parents, and then we need to give them some time to come to a decision. And the decisions that they make could also end up as wanting to terminate the pregnancy, and that's a big call, so they need to have some time over there. And once they agree upon that, then actions thereof. So if you have a look, we start at 12 weeks. By 18th week, the medical termination of pregnancy needs to be done, beyond which it becomes risky. So you have a short window from the time the sample is given to the time you take an action. And believe me, these weeks fly before you can even realize that they have occurred. So how do we do the entire work? Now that we've got a father who is a trait, we've got a mother who is a trait, and at 12 weeks the chorionic villi sample is being sent to us, how do we process it? The samples required for identification would be the father's blood, because we are going to take the DNA of the father, a maternal blood for confirming the mutations in the mother, and the chorionic villi to check up the genotype of the fetus and then act accordingly. For those who haven't seen, a chorionic villi sample is something like this. It's a tissue from which the DNA needs to be extracted. The test that we do for detecting mutations, the 5 common mutations of beta thalassemia, is ARMS PCR. What is ARMS PCR? How do you use the primers, and what's the principle of the test and interpretation of the results? I have a separate video. I'll post the link for the video under this video. Please have a look at it before we proceed further. ARMS PCR, to quite a similar thing, is like a normal PCR. We need to make a master mix. The master mix would contain the usual stuff like the water, the buffers, the DNTPs, the Taq polymerase, and the magnesium chloride. DNA from the sample that we need to test, it could be the father's sample, it could be the mother's sample, it could be the DNA from the chorionic villi. We need an internal control forward and an internal control reverse. This will validate that our PCR processes are correct. We use a common mutation specific common forward. Now what do I mean by that? If you look at the gene layout of the beta globin gene, it consists of 3 exons. We have the common forward and the common reverse primer here, which amplifies the entire gene. This is where we have a common mutation specific primer, which is the forward primer, and on the other side we have the mutation or the allele specific reverse primer. Now each of the mutations we check up have a separate primer. So the master mix is put in this PCR reaction vessels. To this we add the specific probes for amplifying that specific allele. So the first we would put an IVS 11 reverse primer. In here we put IVS 15 reverse primer, frame shift 89 mutation reverse primer, and frame shift 4142 reverse primer. So if we're putting 4 tubes and we're going to detect the mutations, the 5 common mutations. 4 tubes, 5 mutations. Did I get it right or did I miss out something? We need to revisit this pattern. This is our internal controls which is going to be amplified. This is a mutation specific primer and this is where we are putting the reverse primers. Your IVS 11, 15 and 89 generally are around the exome 1 region. The IVS 15 is slightly behind. So the products that are formed between these is around the 200-250 base pairs, and between this and IVS 1 and frame shift 4142, it's going to be a larger base pair. Just keep this in mind. So these are the 4 mutations. We put the mutation specific reverse primers and we're going to amplify them, and these are the base pairs. Now there is a mutation which is 619 del. A large region of this 619 base pairs gets deleted, as a result of which the entire internal control, which is 861 base pairs, actually reduces to 249 base pairs. And since the sites for the mutation specific primers are not there, these don't get amplified. The 619 del presents as a separate band, and that's how we're getting 5 mutations when we're using 4 tubes. Now this is how the PCR gel looks like. This is the internal control, and these are the bands which you get for the corresponding mutations 15, frame shift 1889 and IVS 11. As I said, the 4142 frame shift, the site for the mutation specific primer reverse primer is slightly downstream, so the base pairs are going to be larger. As a result, the band is formed at a different place. Now let's identify this mutation. You're getting a band of internal controls that validates your PCR run. You're getting a band corresponding to the IVS 11. You're getting a band corresponding to frame shift 4142. And as I said, this is bigger than this. What is the mutation of this child? It is a compound heterozygous of IVS 11 and frame shift 4142. Now let's go to the next example. You're getting a band in 89 and a band in 4142. So what is this mutation? Right, it's a compound heterozygous state of frame shift 89 and frame shift 4142. Now if you get a band like this, note there's no internal control. There are 4 bands, all of them at around about the same level. This is the pattern you'll get in a 619 deletion. No internal control and a band in all the 4 tubes. In the previous cases, we had the band in one of the particular kind of mutations, whereas in a 619 deletion, all the tubes will give the same band and you will find that the internal control is not present. Okay, how do you interpret this? We're getting 4 bands over here, so that is a 619 deletion, that is obvious, but we're getting the internal control bands. What is this? This is a heterozygous state with a 619 deletion. It's a heterozygous state with a 619 deletion. The other gene is normal, doesn't show the 619 deletion, that's why you see the internal controls. One of the genes is showing 619 deletion, and that's why you're getting the bands over here. How do you interpret this? We have a 619 deletion and we have a IVS 11. Because the IVS 11 doesn't show 619 deletion, you're getting the internal controls also. You'll get the internal controls, you'll get the IVS 11. Along with that, you will get the band for the 619 deletion. So this is how you identify the mutations based on the ARMS PCR. Last situation. You're doing a PCR and you get a IVS 15. is this child homozygous or is this child heterozygous? Till these cases, we were getting two mutations, so we could talk about a compound heterozygosity case. Now here, we are only getting one mutation. Is this a homozygous or is it a heterozygous? The answer to this question is very difficult because qualitative PCR will not give you the answer about whether it is a homozygous or a heterozygous state. Keep this in mind. When we talk about interpreting results, this will be very important. So now comes down, we have identified the in-risk patients. Who were they? They were the mother who came for an antenatal visit who was Thal trait. Then we checked up the father. The father also had a Thal trait. Then at 12 weeks, we took the father's blood, the mother's blood, the chorionic villi sample. We extracted the DNA. We did our ARMS PCR. Now we have the mutations with us. How are we going to interpret this situation? Let's go to case 1. Case 1, father is a Thal trait, mother is a Thal trait. So the defective gene, I'm putting it as F and M in red color. From the chorionic villi sample, when you do a PCR, you just get either the F mutation or the M mutation. You do not get both the mutations. In this case, this child will be a Thal trait. But if you get a response for both the F and the M in the chorionic villi, this child is a compound heterozygous state and this child will probably be transfusion dependent. Now let's have a small word about maternal blood contamination. While correcting the chorionic villi sample, there are chances that injuries could occur to the maternal genital tract in which some bit of maternal blood would get mixed with this chorionic villi. If anybody has seen how a DNC specimen appears, it would be mixed with maternal blood. Now the point is, when we are extracting the DNA from the chorionic villi, which has maternal blood also, the DNA that we get in the chorionic villi will be that of the chorionic villi as well as the DNA from the mother. So when we get a response during our PCR and you get a maternal mutation in the PCR, you're not very sure whether this mutation is coming from the chorionic villi or whether this is the mutation from the maternal blood which has contaminated the chorionic villi sample. Once again, let me explain this. When we've collected the chorionic villi sample, if there was a damage to the maternal genital tract and some bit of blood got mixed with this chorionic villi, we've processed and extracted the DNA. The DNA that we've extracted would contain the DNA from the chorionic villi as well as that of the mother. So while doing a PCR, if the maternal mutation gets amplified, we're not very sure whether this mutation is coming from the chorionic villi or the chorionic villi inherited the normal gene from the mother, but it's giving you a positive result because the maternal DNA has got mixed into this blood. Then making calls and interpreting the ARMS PCR reports is going to be a bit tricky. Let's understand it by examples. Let's take case 2. The father again has an HF. I said the starting point is that the father and the mother, both of them are traits. So the father is HF, mother is HM. Child is showing only the F mutation, not the M mutation. Could there be maternal blood contamination in this chorionic villi sample? The answer is no, because you're not getting a maternal amplification. The maternal gene has the maternal mutation is not amplified. Only the father's mutation has got amplified. So this child, first and foremost, the sample does not have maternal DNA contamination. That's the first thing we learned. And the second thing we learned is that the child has inherited only the mutation from the father and not from the mother. So this would be a trait. Now let's go to case 3. The father is again HF, the mother is HM. The chorionic villi shows amplification of the M mutation. Could there be a maternal blood contamination in this? We are getting the maternal mutation in this. So could there be a maternal blood contamination in this chorionic villi sample? Well, the answer to that question is yes, there could be. Could be that the chorionic villi could be that there was no maternal contamination and the chorionic villi was HM, that is, didn't take the normal gene from the father and took the M gene from the mother. So this is a THAL trait. Or the child could have been normal with the maternal DNA which is coming from contamination amplifying the M. That's also a possibility. But here the outcome of the child is either the child would be normal or the child at worst could be a trait. So this question does not have much significance in this scenario. Once again, we are getting the M mutation. The M mutation could be because the child could be a THAL trait inheriting the maternal mutation. That's the worst case scenario. And the best case scenario is the child is normal. There was maternal DNA contamination, but what difference does it make? Now case 4. The father has HF, mother has HM, the child is now a compound heterozygous state. So is this actually a compound heterozygous state? There's another possibility that the child could have just inherited the father's mutation, in which case the child is a THAL trait, plus the maternal DNA which has contaminated, this gave you the M signal. It didn't come from the chorionic villi, it came from this contaminated blood. Now here we are talking about a child which is either compound heterozygous, who is going to be transfusion dependent, or a THAL minor who would not be transfusion dependent. And the knowledge is very important to know the exact genotype of the child because it has significant implications. This is a transfusion dependent child, whereas this is an asymptomatic child. So here the question whether maternal contamination has occurred or not becomes important. So when does that question become important? When the chorionic villi sample shows a compound heterozygous pattern. Here the question becomes very important. So how do we confirm it? We have to once again resort to VNTR analysis. What is VNTR? I have a small video in my YouTube channel. The link to that video will be given under this video. Please have a look at it. Understand the concepts of VNTR. How is it applied for detecting DNA fingerprinting, detecting paternity, and we will just discuss about interpretation of the results over here. So we do the VNTR pattern analysis of the father's DNA, of the mother's DNA, and the chorionic villi sample DNA. Usually ApoB gene is taken for these tests. There are a lot of VNTRs available. You could use 3 or 4 of such VNTR markers in the further studies in case one of the genes is not informative. Now what is VNTR? There are tandem repeats in the non-coding protein regions in various sets of the DNA. The number of copy numbers, one is inherited from the father and one is inherited from the mother. So if you're amplifying a VNTR, generally you could get 2 different copy numbers, one from the father and one from the mother. So here is the VNTR pattern of the father showing 2 different bands. Here's the VNTR of the mother showing 2 different bands. And this is the VNTR pattern of the same gene in the chorionic villi sample. If you see, one of the VNTR matches the VNTR of the mother, and this VNTR band matches with the VNTR band of the father. So that means the child is biologically related to the father and the mother. One. Second thing, the child has just inherited one VNTR copy from the father and one VNTR copy from the mother. This is what is expected. So this chorionic villi sample does not have contamination with the maternal blood. Now take the next example. It was the same child, but both the VNTR patterns of the mother is visible in the chorionic villi sample. You have a VNTR from the father and you have both the VNTR patterns from the mother. Now This is a case where fetal-maternal contamination has occurred, where the maternal DNA was also present in the chorionic villi sample. And here, if you get a compound heterozygous state, you're not confident in taking a call whether the child was compound heterozygous or a thiol trait with contamination of maternal blood. So this is the importance of doing a VNTR analysis to confirm whether maternal blood got contaminated with the chorionic villi sample or not. Now, I'd use the word informative marker. Let us take another case where there is a father, there is a mother, there is a chorionic villi. This is the VNTR pattern of the father, this is the VNTR pattern of the mother, and this is the VNTR pattern of the chorionic villi. Now, if you have a look at this VNTR marker and the VNTR marker of the mother are very close to each other. The base pairs are quite similar. When you're doing it in agarose, the resolutions may be poor. And if you get a band somewhere over here, you're not very sure whether you could call it that this has come from the father or this has come from the mother. If you say that this is from the mother, then that is contamination. If you say that this is of a father, it is not contamination. So you're not very sure about this. You're not able to make a very decisive call on this. So then this gene where we've amplified the VNTR is not an informative marker. Supposing we were using the ApoB100 and we got a result like this, we will not be very confident to make a call on this. So probably we need to check up some other genes like the DST gene or whichever gene you have standardized in your lab and hope to see whether you get distinct bands that you can make a call. Now, the most important thing is when you're doing a VNTR analysis, the maternal VNTR pattern should be too discrete. And then you should compare it with the child. Now, if you have a look over here, this is a band. This is actually two bands in the father which are very close to each other. Doesn't make a difference because this band is being seen over here. This band is seen over here. And this maternal band is not present over here. So this chorionic villi sample does not show feto-maternal contamination. So this is why when we get a compound heterozygous state, it is very important for us to know the answer whether there was feto-maternal contamination or not. And to confirm feto-maternal contamination, we need to do a chorionic villi sample assay. Now I'll give you another case. The father was mutation A, the mother had a mutation A, and the chorionic villi sample also showed the A mutation. Now, father is a thiol trait, so it's HA, mother is a thiol trait, it's HA, child is showing you just an A response. Now, is this a heterozygous state where the child is going to be a thiol trait, or is this a homozygous state where the child is going to be transfusion dependent? Now, this situation will quite commonly occur in India because of consanguineous marriages. And when you get this and you got this amplification, as long as the father's mutation and the mother's mutation are different, it's easy to go about with the job. But when the father's mutation and the mother's mutation is the same and the chorionic villi is also showing a mutation, we don't know whether this is a trait or whether this is thiol major. To resolve that, we need to do exome 1 sequencing. And when you do the sequencing, you can get a pattern whether it's a homozygous or a heterozygous state, in which case you're very clear about what is the diagnosis. Another thing you can do is you can do an ARMS PCR using a mutation specific reverse primer which is specific for the wild type. Now, what do I mean by that? This was the gene layout and this is the PCR layout I talked to you about. These are the internal controls, this is the common forward and these are the reverse. These primers are going to bind only when the mutation is occurred. Here we don't put all this, we just put a reverse primer, which is we put the internal control forward reverse, we put the common mutation forward, and we don't put these two primers, we put the wild type primer or the normal or a primer that amplifies the normal variant and do the PCR. If we get a band, that means the normal variant was also present, in which case the child is a trait. If the normal variant doesn't get amplified, that means both the genes were mutated and the child is thalassaemic major. Once again, let me explain that. This is your internal control forward, internal control reverse. We need to put that. This is the common mutation specific forward. We need to put that. Normally, we put the mutation specific reverse primers for all our alleles. We don't put that. We know that it was mutation A. Let us say it is a IVS11 mutation. This is picking up the IVS11 mutation. Now, I don't put these primers. I put a primer which will anneal if there was no IVS11 mutation, the wild type. This primer will bind to the wild type. Now, if the child was a homozygous IVS11, this primer will not bind. So, you will not get a band. But if the child was heterozygous, that means one of the genes had the IVS11, the other gene was normal. This primer will bind to the normal and give you that band. So, if you get this band, you're sure that the child was a heterozygous. If you don't get this band, you're sure that the child is homozygous. So that is how you can confirm whether the child is homozygous or heterozygous when the father and the mother have the same mutations. Now let's go to case 6. This will be the last of the cases. You've done an HPLC for the father and the mother. They both show a THAL trait pattern. Then you take the DNA and try to do the mutation analysis, and you find that the father or the mother gives you a mutation, but the other spouse does not show any mutation. You think back, maybe your HPLC is wrong and you repeat it, and that once again confirms that this is a THAL trait. What could be the options? The option could be that there is a mutation other than the standard 5 we are testing. I said the standard 5 covers 90%. Depending upon different geographic regions, the coverage percentage could vary from 80 to 95. But keep in mind that there could be other mutations which are not there in these 5. That is why the HPLC is saying that the father is a beta thal or the mother is a beta thal, but your your ARMS PCR for the 5 common mutations has not detected it. For this, we don't have any other option. We have to go for exon 1 sequencing because most of the mutations are clustered in exon 1. So when we have to do exon 1 mutation, having a sequencer in my lab is a very costly expenditure. You need to have a lot of technically trained people who can do the sequencing, as a result of which it becomes beyond our reach. That small centers just do ARMS PCR and maybe the bigger centers can do the bigger work, and that's why most of the centers who even have a thermocycler do not think about antenatal thalassemia diagnosis. Or if I give you another situation, that use a forward and reverse primer for amplifying the exon 1 gene of the beta globin. Synthesis of the primers just costs 2,000 rupees, and you can do 1,000 reactions with this 2,000 rupees. Then, since you have a normal PCR thermocycler with you, you can amplify the exon 1. That's a normal PCR, and the cost for one PCR reaction is 300 rupees. And then send this PCR product for sequencing, outsource the sequencing. There are a lot of people who can take your PCR product and give you the sequence. And you know how much they charge for that? 500 rupees. So now the question comes, is sequencing limited only to large centers? If we get a variant mutation sitting in my lab only with my thermocycler, can I identify it? And the answer to that is yes. So if you want to set up an antenatal thalassemia diagnosis in your lab, all you require is a thermocycler, an HPLC machine. You need custom made primers. We require 5 sets of them. Even assuming it costs 3,000 rupees per primer, 15,000, and you are ready to do thousands of reactions. The 5 sets which I am talking about is the internal control forward, internal control reverse, common forward, mutation specific primers, ApoB100 and exon 1. These are the primers you require. The definitions of these primers I can give you if you contact me specifically. And with that, ABCD, anybody can do it. All you require is a will and a zeal to do it. And if you still don't have it, I would suggest you spend one day with a family who has a Thal major child, see the plight of the child, see the plight of the parents, and then you'll once again revisit and say, yes, I need to do it. But a word of caution, don't jump gang ho into it. We are in India, and when we're doing all this, we need genetic counseling. You do an HPLC for the mother, you find that there was a Thal trait, and then you very enthusiastically call the father and say, look, your wife has got Thal trait, probably you may also be having a Thal trait, let us investigate, otherwise your child could be a Thal major. And where do you end up? The father goes and tells that the girl's parents didn't tell me that this lady had a defect in her blood. They have bundled a defective lady onto me. This has been kept out of me, and they are looking for divorce. Not only that, the word spreads around, and this girl's sister, she doesn't get married because there was some defect in us khandan mein, there is some defect, so don't marry over there. You just went exuberantly trying to do something which is actually the correct thing, and medically, ethically, it's the correct thing to do. But if you're not backed up with genetic counseling, you're ending up into a big problem. These are not hypothetical situations. I have faced them. So we need to be very clear that on the medical realms, with PCR, we will be able to do it. But beyond just doing the test and calling out the reports and calling out the mutations, you need to look at a bigger picture of the patient family. And if you've got a result, how are you going to explain it to the parents, and what type of decisions are they taking? Are they taking their own informed decisions, or are you forcing your decisions on them? A lot of issues come into that. So genetic counseling, keep it in mind, that becomes essential. So the last slide is on hand holding. If you think this is easy, if you think you can do it, if you feel that you need to do it, please contact me. I'm sharing my email ID and my phone number to you. Dr. Somesh from Maulana Azad Medical College, he's also been in this field for over 6 to 8 years now, and he's been very kind in allowing me to share his email ID and his phone number to you. So in case you have any issues about what is the primer definitions, what is the thermocycler settings, how to interpret bands, how to standardize PCRs in your lab, please contact us. We need to extend this to as many labs as possible with the end vision that no Thal major is born from now onwards. Thank you.